Concern about competitive balance in the OHSAA tournaments was raised by a group of school administrators whose 10-year study showed that nearly 50% of the championships in selected team sports were won by non-public schools, even though the non-public schools make up only 17% of the OHSAA membership. Competitive balance is neither unique nor new to Ohio. In fact, there were referendum issues brought forward by school administrators to separate the tournaments between public and non-public schools in both 1978 and 1993, and both were defeated. While concern over the current system was raised, coming forward with a recommendation to improve the system has proved challenging. Why a better solution seems elusive, what does seem to be fairly universal is the comment heard from most coaches and administrators that in order to be the best, we want to compete against the best. Still others believe that separate tournaments are the only way to go, and others have even suggested that an enrollment multiplier may be used for non-public schools.
The OHSAA Competitive Balance Committee was formed in January 2010. They were comprised of 29 school administrators and coaches from across the state from both public and non-public schools, both large and small, along with members of the OHSAA Board of Directors and administrative staff, and representatives from both the state superintendents and principals associations. The committee's charge was to attempt to identify the factors that account for the disproportionate number of championships being won by an equally disproportionate smaller group of member schools, and to determine if anything could be done to balance these factors. This meant that the criteria chosen for the new plan must, number one, move toward a more competitive balance in all the chosen sports. Number two, maximize sustainability. Number three, minimize complexity as much as possible. And number four, maximize support from both the OHSAA membership and all interested constituents. The committee's recommendation is that all member schools of the OHSAA pass through the same filter. This means that school enrollment will continue at the beginning of their respective tournament divisions. Once that data is received, schools will be placed into their respective tournament divisions based on their sport-by-sport athletic counts. 3 factors will be used to determine athletic counts for each school. Number 1, a school boundary factor, or how students are obtained. Number 2, a socioeconomic factor. And number 3, a tradition factor. The Competitive Balance Committee identified school boundary as a key factor in competitive balance. From where and how a district or schools receive its students does affect athletic success. Here are the current percentages proposed by the committee. Keep in mind that these percentages could eventually be modified by the OHSAA Board of Directors per its discretion or through a recommendation from a competitive balance standing committee that will be established should the referendum issue pass.
Number 1, non-public schools with no boundaries will have 10% of its enrollment added. Number 2, non-public schools with limited boundaries will have 8% of its enrollment added. Number 3, public schools with statewide open enrollment will have 6% of its enrollment added. And number 4, public schools with open enrollments limited to adjacent districts will have 4% of its enrollment added. And number 5, public schools with no open enrollment will not add anything to its enrollment. Note that this percentage will not be applied to public schools with open enrollment if their net number of open enrollment students is negative. That means if they have more open enrollment students leaving the school district than coming into their school. It should be noted that the school boundary factor would be gender specific, meaning that the percentage would be placed on school boys enrollment for use in boys sports and on schools girls enrollment for use in girls sports.
Next, the committee also determined that the socioeconomic makeup of a district is a key factor in competitive balance, just as it is in the probabilities of educational success. If a district is disadvantaged, the participants may have fewer opportunities available to participate and be successful in interscholastic athletics. The committee chose an objective measure for the socioeconomic factor, which is a number of free lunch participants in a high school or district that is reported to the State Department of Education through claims submitted by participating schools. This number cannot be manipulated by schools, and many schools, including non-public schools, have students who participate in this program. Here are the current percentages proposed by the committee. Again, keep in mind that these percentages could be modified by the OHSAA board or through a recommendation from a competitive balance standing committee.
The number of free lunch participants within either the high school, if an exact data count is provided, or the school district times 10% equals the number of students to be subtracted from the enrollment.
Lastly, the committee determined that tradition is also a factor which impacts athletic success. Success breeds success, as they say. Student athletes often want to go to a program that has a tradition of success. While that is not necessarily recruiting, it is a factor that cannot be discounted when combined with the other factors. A school's enrollment could increase by adding a percentage based on a school's most recent 4-year tradition of advancement to the regional and/or state tournaments. Here are the current percentages proposed by the committee. Again, these percentages could be modified down the road.
First, each school with an appearance in a regional final will have 6% of its enrollment added for each particular sport. Second, each school with an appearance in a state tournament will have 8% of its enrollment added to each particular sport. And number 3, each school with an appearance in the state finals will have 10% of its enrollment added for each particular sport. Please note, while these highest percentages in the 3 instances would be used for each of the individual years, the total percentage for all 4 years would be added together to arrive at the total tradition factor.
As mentioned, once all 3 factors, the boundary factor, the socioeconomic factor, and the tradition factor, are derived, schools will be placed into their respective tournament divisions based on their sport-by-sport athletic counts. The final athletic count would be achieved by the beginning enrollment factor, adding the boundary factor, deducting the socioeconomic factor, and adding the tradition factor.
After understanding the formula, let's now put it into action with a few examples. Example number 1. A public school with a boys enrollment of 388 and girls enrollment of 330. For this example, we're going to look at the girls enrollments. First, the school boundary factor would be computed with a school that has the statewide open enrollment and a positive net gain of open enrollment students. In this example, the girls would add 6% of 330 students, or 19.8 students, to their enrollment count. Socioeconomic factor for this school has 85 total students who are on the free lunch program. 10% of that 85 students, or 8.5 students, would be subtracted from the school's enrollment factor. Finally, the tradition factor for girls has a school's basketball team reaching the regional finals in 1 year and not advancing to the state tournament during the past 4-year cycle. This would add 6% of 330 to that school's total enrollment. When adding all of the factors together, the school's enrollment factor would be 330, plus the school's boundary factor of 19.8, deducting the economic factor of 8.5, and adding the tradition factor of 19.8, giving a total athletic count of 361.1. For this example, 370 was the top of Division II, and therefore this girls' school would likely remain in Division II. Example number 2 is a school that is a non-public school with boys enrollment of 175 and girls enrollment of 165. We're going to look at the boys enrollment for football, for example. First, the school boundary factor would see that there is no school boundaries for this school because it is a non-public school. Using the factors, you would add 10% of 175 to the total enrollment. Next, the socioeconomic factor shows that the school has 30 students who are on the free lunch program. This would equate to subtracting 10% of 30, or 3 students, from the athletic count for socioeconomic factors. Finally, the tradition factor shows that the boys football team has reached the regional finals 1 year, the state tournament 1 year, and was state champion 2 other years during the past 4-year cycle. Adding those together, 6% of 175 for the regional finals, 8% of 175 for the state semifinals, 10% of 175 for each of the state champion years, gives a total enrollment addition of 61.5. For purposes of their athletic count, you would take the 175 boys enrollment plus the 17.5 school boundary factor minus the 3 socioeconomic factor and add 61.5 in the tradition factor, giving a total of 251 total athletic count. Since 177 was the beginning of Division IV in football, it is likely that this school would move up to Division IV from Division V, as was previously reported. Example number 3 is a public school in an urban area. Their enrollment is 540 boys. However, they have no tradition given that they have not made it into the regional or state tournaments previously in the last 4 years. They have no open enrollment permission to allow students to come in, and they have a very large free lunch count of 255 students on free lunch. Taking the 255 students times 10% would result in a reduction of 25.5 students from their enrollment count. Given the enrollment is 540, there would be no open enrollment factor, no boundary factor to be added. We would subtract 25.5 for the socioeconomic factor and would not add any factors for tradition, giving a total athletic count of 540 minus 25.5 of 514.5 as their athletic count. Since 518 was the bottom of Division I, it would be likely that this school would move down from Division I to Division II.
As you are aware, the OHSAA Board of Directors approved the basic concept of the Competitive Balance Committee's proposal. They placed the issue up for referendum, and principals are voting on this proposed change during the first 2 weeks of May. Implementation is scheduled for no later than the 2013-14 school year, but could begin as early as the 2012-2013 school year. The Board of Directors' plan, which will be spelled out in a companion sports regulation, is that only team sports will initially be affected by the proposal. Those team sports are football, soccer, and volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball and softball in the spring. Consideration will be given to add other sports in the future. Additionally, as Dave already mentioned, a competitive balance standing committee will be formed. This committee will monitor the effectiveness of the athletic count formula and recommend to the Board of Directors any changes in the weight to be given to any one or more of the factors in the formula. Changes recommended by the Standing Committee could then be approved by the Board of Directors and reflected in the sport regulations, which means that no voting by member schools on these changes would be necessary. The proposal still leaves questions to be answered. Among them are, is the proposal the best solution to the competitive balance issue? And that's certainly up for debate. But this proposal does ensure change. It does incorporate a concept that does not rely solely on school enrollment, and it does treat all OHSAA member schools equally and fairly. Is this proposal the stopping point for dealing with competitive balance? No, and we understand that. In fact, this proposed change is probably just the starting point. It would allow for Ohio to get its feet wet with a new concept, but at the same time, we are expecting modifications to occur over time as this plan is reviewed by the OHSAA Board of Directors and the Standing Competitive Balance Committee, and from feedback that is received from you, our member school administrators. Is this the only change you see occurring in the near future regarding competitive balance? No, because this proposal does not address the Division I issue, where the school enrollment gap between those schools at the low end of the division versus those at the high end of the division are enormous. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. In summary, we ask you to keep an open mind as you vote on this proposed change. As Jeff's data pointed out, By design, not that many schools will be significantly impacted by this proposal initially, at least as it stands now with the current language. But we feel that this plan has a lot of merit. It has been designed by school people, it has been well thought out, and is the fairest for all OHSAA member schools.